Hello, and welcome to the Fintech Times podcast, focused on discussing the latest fintech topics and trends from around the world. Established in 2016, the Fintech Times is a global multimedia news outlet centered around the world's first leading fintech newspaper. We report all the latest and brightest ideas from the fintech world.
As technology moves to modernise traditional banking services, a range of digital bank enablers, including technology vendors, fintech firms, SIs and consultancies, now find themselves with a seat at the table as banks look for new ways to innovate and compete against an increasingly experience-driven consumer mindset. Today, we're going to examine some of the challenges banks face when looking to roll out new technology, from how digital enablers can align with traditional business goals and to how these collaborations will contribute to a new banking ecosystem. It's also our final webinar of the year, and our panellists will also take this opportunity to examine emerging trends across digital transformation and what will be unmissable in 2022. And we have a great group of people for today's discussion. I'd like to welcome them all on stage with me. I've got Anton Langbroek, General Manager, Dash at Mambu, Eric Newcomer, Chief Technology Officer at WSO2, and Andreas Wolf, Chief Commercial Officer at Raisin Bank. Hello, everyone.
Hello, Gina. Good morning, everyone.
I'm just going to start off, maybe if we get you guys to introduce yourselves. So Anton, you joined first. So do you want to give me a quick introduction?
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. Anton Langbroek, my name. I am General Manager at Mambu for the DACH region, so covering Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. I've got a finance background, spent almost 15 years now in financial services. Started working for a bank, then moved into to tech companies, had several roles there. I've got a background in risk management, payments, and core banking.
Excellent, thank you. Eric.
Thanks, Gina. Good morning, everyone. I'm Eric Newcomer, CTO at WSO2. Been here about a year. Before that, it was 10 years in financial services at Citibank and Credit Suisse. I did a lot of work, especially on cloud migration at those companies. I'm very happy to be here today to talk about what we're doing at WSO2 to help digital enablers succeed better with the new challenges.
Excellent. And Andreas, welcome.
Thanks for having me. My name is Andreas Wolf. I'm Chief Commercial Officer of Raisin Bank, responsible for our banking as a service offering and our IT stack. And the bank has just recently moved to a fully cloud-based system, so happy to share some insights there.
Excellent, be very valuable today, I'm sure. So to start, I thought it might be interesting to look at where innovation and integration have come from and what have been the main changes in traditional banking over the last 12 to 18 months. Andreas, do you want to go back to that one first?
Yeah, so I mean, banking has always been a digital business, right? Of course, there have been manual labor involved, but basically it's around risk management, numbers, payments, reporting, and so on. So I think the very nature of a bank is digital. Now we've come a long way from old IBM racks and systems that have been developed in-house. To really modern systems. And I think many incumbents are stuck with old IT stacks and are not able to move to other systems. But at the end, the pace of the industry, how things are changing, trends evolving, new business models emerging will require a real step up there in order to not only fulfill today's needs of customers, but also be able to compete tomorrow.
Excellent. And Eric, you've been at WSO2 for the last year. What differences have you seen already?
We've seen quite a push for digitization because of the pandemic, obviously. And this even started when I was at Citi before I left. I was at the consumer bank in my most recent role there. And of course, we had to quickly digitize any manual process remaining at the branches because no one was able to go. But if we look at the overall trend and what we're trying to support, I would say that the trend is toward more customer-friendly interaction, customer-friendly experience. The industry's been disrupted for a long time now, maybe perhaps 10, 15 years by technology trends around touchscreen, which caused everyone to re-engineer their applications for their user interactivity, by the digital disruptors, the famous ones being Uber, Amazon, Netflix, PayPal, and so on, and coming into the banking space, all the fintechs, taking advantage of the new modern technology on the cloud, which is another major technology innovation over the last few years that have caused companies to have to redo and rethink and re-engineer and provide an improved experience in a better way to deliver their products and services, especially in the financial sector.
Definitely, there's been quite a change. Anton, perhaps you can explain that one for us as well.
Yeah, of course, what we see is that a lot of changes within traditional banks are taking place currently. I think a major shift here is in culture and thinking on how to innovate and really making sure that the future for the bank is more sustainable as well. So I think those are things that we see evolve. But for us, what I thought was a good eye-opener is that some of the banks obviously struggling with innovation, that they start to shift their thinking in ways of greenfield kind of spin-offs, where they offer a traditional financial product, but on a complete new greenfield setup, which basically obviously allows these banks to go to market much faster than in the traditional way of infrastructures that they've been using over time. We have seen some successes there where, for example, SME lending with ABN AMRO New 10 has been built up on a greenfield operation, which is allowing ABN AMRO to really replace actually their old infrastructure with a new greenfield operation. I think that is one of the ways forward for banks to slowly, piece by piece, replacing their legacy infrastructure with these kinds of spin-offs actually.
It's a really good point. I mean, certainly on my sort of day job and what comes across my desk, I keep hearing sort of new technologies, and as a service seems to be the biggest buzzword at the moment. What are the more popular service you've seen requested? Maybe back to Anton and we'll go around the other way this time.
What we see is indeed not only about the technology itself, but also on regulation, how to really be able to run on cloud. What do I need as a bank to do it? So it's still where we need to do a lot of educational work next to actually convincing the clients on how to use a composable infrastructure. So where I think that regulation will move into tech as well. And we have not seen that in the past. But the banks are basically now being forced to do that. So those are services that we request that we get, but also services requesting around an ecosystem. So how do I manage an ecosystem? So that's where we do some educational work as well. And of course, as a service also means that it's a more shared responsibility than it was in the past between tech providers as well as the banks. And I think that is something both tech providers as well as banks need to learn how to work together on in a more complex ecosystem than a bank is used to working with.
Excellent. Eric, would you like to add to that?
Sure. I think software as a service trend represents an easier way for banks to get many of their functions into the cloud and onto the cloud and getting the benefits of the cloud. I think as we know, by now, it takes some investment to get those benefits. You get the always-on feeling for customers that, you know, for example, you're on your phone today. A lot of the apps don't even work unless you're connected. Cloud provides that kind of always-on connectivity, although, as we see once in a while, they do fail, as they did this week. But then you also have the scalability, you know, so you're not crashing your websites or crashing your apps anymore because the cloud's able to handle that. And you've got the agility of rapid change and introducing new capabilities and innovating, as Capital One has sort of famously said in their move to the cloud, innovating at the speed that customers demand through the agility and the automation, the microservices-based architectures, and so on. But we still think this, you know, here at WSO2, we think it's still a bit too difficult to do this. The culture change has been mentioned. That's probably even more significant than the technology change in terms of how companies have to adapt themselves. But on the technology side, we think it can be made much easier, and that's what we're working on. Excellent.
And Andreas, over to you.
From my side of the table, the trend is even a bit broader. I mean, traditionally, banks and financial service players have always had the idea that from end to end, they provide a service or a value to the customer. I think that is those days are gone, right? It's simply not possible in these times and with the speed of innovation we see to be best at everything. So we are looking at distributed value chains where every participant in an ecosystem has a special role, a special function that they are good at, either in acquiring customers, being a customer front end, being a producer, being a back end infrastructure provider. Nobody should really dare to do it all on their or her own. So it's really about finding out what you're good at and finding the right partners that you want to play with in providing the value proposition to your customers.
Definitely. And I think partnerships are really important. And I think we'll be talking about that later as well. But maybe Eric, coming to you first on this one, in terms of digital innovation, especially for traditional incumbents, what would you say are the biggest challenges?
Well, I think Andreas's point is very well taken, that you need to find your specialty, your real item of focus where you can differentiate yourself from other banks, other institutions, other fintechs, and focus quite a bit on that. In doing so, this is you get into this build versus buy classic dilemma. And differentiation is really not something you can buy, because if you could, then everyone would have it. So this is where you have to focus on the custom build part of it, which I think is an important distinction to make. And you have to really focus and figure out where you want to just buy your capabilities from SaaS and where you want to build something unique and different and compelling for the customers that you want to provide that experience to.
Brilliant. And Anton, in terms of biggest challenges, what do you think would those be?
Yeah, so touched a little bit already on it, right? I think everybody understands that the traditional banks are having difficulties with their legacy infrastructures as well. And I think what we hear and see a lot is where to start, and fully agree that actually you can't just do the back end or can't just do the front end. We've seen both happening. So where you had a very modern back end with all kinds of legacy systems, even sending flat files into the most technology backends. That I think is one thing. Secondly, which is actually slowing banks down in really starting with these kinds of projects, is again here the culture. We still see a lot of banks that they are enormously proud of self-built systems, and they are actually struggling to holding on to these kinds of systems. And that makes it very, very hard to be really opening up yourself as well for the other partners in place. I think that is one thing that we see. The other piece is of course on the integration and migration itself. There is still a lot of risk involved if you have to reduce your complexity in your systems, but also moving data from A to B. I think there we as tech providers need to be stronger in support in the banks, as well as finding new ways of being more efficient in doing so. And of course, the banks are not really, and we see that multiple times, the banks are not really used to speaking to what I call the T-shirts, that's us. So talking to the tech guys. So we sometimes have a different language. So finding that translation and finding each other together in having the banks really understand what an ecosystem for them means in future, as well as what it means for them today. I think that is a lot of work to be done on both sides.
Definitely. And I mean, do you think as well there's a big drive here from the consumer, because they see what's available on cloud-based systems? They see that the user interface is more easier, it's more tactile, people of an older generation can even use it. But where do we think this kind of pressure on incumbents is to change and tech up is coming from? What do you think, Andreas, to that?
I think there's an important distinction. I think many even incumbent banks get somehow, let's say, okay UX towards the customer, build a fancy app. That's one thing, and that's probably the not going against all the UX and UI designers out there, but that's one thing to provide a nice app. the thing is, what happens then with data you put in? How is the product? How are the regulatory processes? How is the back end in the machine room doing? And then we usually have, a high performing app, but the processes behind that are still 20th century processes. And that's the hard part that banks cannot really go away from, right? Because of the complexity that is built in there, right? I think one of the major failures moving away from old systems is not being able to reduce complexity. But, think I have the last 20 contracts from 1970s buildings plan, and I still want to migrate all this into the new system, doomed to fail. It's the culture of not being able to develop processes end to end and have a proper, development process around it. And to be fair, also the relative inexperience in keeping up with the regulatory framework of working in such new environments, distributed systems, outsourcing controls, and so on and so forth. That's all relatively new, both from the application side and also from the regulatory side. And I think many banks or many providers still face a hard time dealing with that.
Definitely, really interesting. And all three of you have mentioned culture as well. So I think that's probably something that's worth touching upon. Who would you say is a good example of a digital culture and an enabling culture of digital innovation? Is there anyone you look towards? Maybe Eric on that question.
I've been fascinated by Capital One's journey over the past 4 years of how to get from on-prem to the cloud, which they've finally done about a year ago, I think. And I'd like to also pick up on a couple of points from Anton and Andreas around the challenges of having these existing systems. We did a mainframe migration when I was at Citi, and one of my frustrations was that business teams held up the mainframe as the epitome of the requirements for the new system. We wanted to have what I called bug for bug compatibility. Something was done wrong in the mainframe system, it had to be done wrong on the new system. So that's an impediment to change, and nobody maybe knows the requirements anymore of a 40-year-old system. So these things have to be rethought. Capital One, very interestingly to me, started their journey by onshoring their staff. Big banks, Citi, very famous for offshoring their development, looking at it as a cost item as opposed to a strategic investment. A lot of these things, thinking have to change. So Capital One's journey, first of all, started with making an understanding that technology was a strategic investment for them rather than a cost center. A lot of banks I would observe have reacted to the fintech disruption of their businesses by cutting costs to stay competitive where they're losing customers, as opposed to taking the braver leap of making a stronger investment in technology and focusing on it in a more strategic way. And I think Capital One is a great example of someone who's done that. They're not our customer at all. I just find their journey very fascinating. I think a lot can be learned by institutional existing banks from what they've done.
Definitely. Anton, would you like to jump in on that one?
Yeah, it's a little bit hard to say because Andreas is in the call, but I think we have looked at Raisin and basically how they have done the transformation, how they're offering their services. I think that is one of the things that we take away as well. We had a strong learning curve as well, coming from real tech now in really getting more and more into banking, because I think it's absolutely essential for us as a company to have a very good banking knowledge as well to be able to make that translation. I think that is what Raisin has been able to do to close that gap. That's just one example. I think who's driving a lot of innovation as well and supporting it. I think we look at the big cloud providers there as well, because they are investing heavily in the market. They enable us to do a great job, but also enable banks and getting them to understand in what the benefits really are. I think that is driving innovation forward for banks by basically providing the services that they do, building even more and more services in the cloud delivery. So I think that is, those would be the two main items from my perspective.
Excellent. Andreas, are you blushing now?
I think that it would be hard for me to name one single player. I think there are certain aspects that certain banks have done pretty well, but they are lacking on others. So for me, the learning is not that look at that one, but look at how culturally they changed their agile approach, how they developed their technology stack, how others did something around information security that I envy. So it's really how can you learn from the best of the best and not copy paste anybody on that journey.
I think it's much easier sometimes to look at the mistakes that have been made and think, well, I won't do that, than to look at perhaps the successes and want to emulate it. But I think that's been really interesting. And I want to say to the audience as well that we're going to have about 10 more minutes of our questions, and then I'd like to put forward your questions. So if you have any more questions for our panelists, please do add them in the chat and I'll take them forward shortly. I'd like to move on to the second half of our discussion and talk about sort of the latest trends that we're seeing, especially in digital transformation. We've talked as well, I keep hearing the word regulation coming up as well. Are there any sort of digital transformation trends that you think we'll be seeing now and forward into 22, 23 as well? Eric, should we start with you on that one?
I think APIs in particular, I see a lot of movement in the industry towards focus on strategic value of APIs, building them out. This is core to our software offering. We're building our next gen API management to make it easier. Just picking up on a couple of things from the previous discussion about the challenges. It is still too hard to make the shift to the newer technologies and to get the investments in place to get the benefits everyone needs from to achieve from the new technologies. And so I think we're going to see a next generation of products also on the deployment side, which is something that's often overlooked and not mentioned as equally important to the development side because of the standardization around Kubernetes and cloud containers, making it very simple to deploy anywhere and automate all of these things and speed up the innovation very rapidly. So I think we got those two things. On the development side, a bigger focus on APIs and of course their security as well, and a bigger focus on the automation of deployment into cloud native containers to get to all those benefits we talked about of those great experiences.
Excellent. Anton, what would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I would say two big trends I would expect to come. So I would expect that customer intelligence becomes more and more important. Because it will be a very strong predictor of your revenue growth and profitability as a financial institution. So next to that, I also think that we see some neobanks that really need to get their clients more active, maybe starting to use those accounts as the main banking account that people have. And what we still see, especially in our region, is that people do use neobanks, but they only use it for example, to go on holiday and have some expenditure there because you have some interesting features that your traditional bank does not offer. And actually, I see that as a big chance for traditional banks as well, because from my perspective, what one of the biggest assets of the current more traditional banks is actually the data. So if they now get the tech to be able to use that data in a much better and structured way that they're doing today, I think that is a big plus for them. Also, I think advantages in robotics and AI will really kick in, and I think that we will get some that will support basically reshoring and as well as localization for those services.
Excellent. And Andreas, coming to you on that one as well.
Many things have been said by Eric. Scalability, security, connectivity, be it through cloud APIs and so on. Maybe just and also continuous development, continuous integration. So we release on a daily basis without any interruptions, and it's a big asset. Not to wait for the next release cycle to deploy something, but to be able to deploy continuously and test automatically every feature that we have in our application stack. I think maybe to add from the business side, what will that allow is not only a better way of developing, but what I strongly believe in is another buzzword sometimes called embedded finance. So financial services offered by non-financial players, right? Because nobody wakes up on Saturday morning to do banking, right? That's not something you dream of. or you want to get something done, buy a car, finance a house, make a transaction, invite somebody for a coffee and share costs. So I think that banking and financial services will happen somewhere else, but with banks. And the way we develop the technology, not only us as a banking as a service provider, but also what Eric said, will be to allow easy integration with wherever you want a finance transaction or a financial service to happen, be it at a hotel reservation website, a used car portal, or in your app. That will be allowed through that technology. And I think more and more of the banking will go away from banks, but happen at a place where life really happens.
Definitely. I mean, I see it myself. I was doing a tax return yesterday and managed to integrate with my bank that, using open banking instead of having to key in all those big details again and make, thinking, have I got it right? Have I got it wrong? It's a large amount of money. And then it becomes easy. And I think as more people adapt and life becomes easy, you'll start thinking less about the back end technology that you're using, perhaps, which will be a huge enabler. And we've got a couple of questions coming in, so let's go to the audience. David McKay, what is the panel's view on a bank's cloud native app security? And is security really app or platform related? And is staff or behaviour related in terms of the non-adherence to IT policies? He also talks about reluctance to enable two-factor authentication on a bank's staff's personal devices and how that affects phishing attacks, etc. Who would like to take that one on?
Oh boy, there's a lot there. I spent the last 18 months at Citi in security. I got into it through the cloud migration activities and having to design a lot of security controls myself in order to enable the migration of some apps into the cloud. And this was a very big thing at Citi. And I would say it's all of these things, of course. And one of the major challenges we saw in a change in requirements of security moving to the cloud was the shared service environment and the need to provide at least privileged access to the employees. Speaking of Capital One earlier, they were hit with an incident of this nature early on in their, I guess, midway in their transition. And this sent a clear message to everyone that we need to pay a lot of attention to staff privileges, to the requirements of shared services that many companies use and locking those down. So that you have the great intersection of the least privileged account with the privileges allowed on the shared resources to make sure that nothing can escape inadvertently. The last thing I'll mention is the big challenge around cloud is everything can be done with APIs. You can set a storage item to not be accessible to the internet as a means of protection, but a programmer, a developer can, with an API, make a change on that configuration. And how do you know that happened? How do you do the monitoring, the alerting, and so on? Big challenge. But I think the good news is technologies exist for these things. It just takes a bit more effort and work to understand and put the controls in place.
Excellent, very good. Do either of Anton or Andreas want to talk on that one, or shall we move on to the next question? Happy with it?
Nothing to add.
Okay, good stuff. And here's one from Anisha. The panel identified culture and technology as two core elements of being able to execute new digital initiatives. Of course, these aren't independent. What role does technology play in building an innovation-friendly culture? Are there any best practices or great examples that come to mind, and how technology can play a role in bringing more of the bank's teams to the right way of thinking and working on innovation? Andreas, do you want to pick that one up first?
I may have said Anton is probably the best to answer that one, so I would pass this one to Anton.
That's fine. We could do passing. It's no problem. Anton, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, I think bringing the tech to the people, right? It sounds very simple, but really just go into the banks, at least that's what we do, and make the technology available. I think I can still remember when I worked for another software company some years ago, it was almost impossible to bring a sandbox to a developer in a bank, right? Sit together with them and really start working together and start building APIs or functionality, and really then show them the benefits to it. And it sounds a little bit like really educating, but it's not educating. It's just getting people in contact with the technology that you're offering, but also showing them the direct benefits. So isn't it extremely great if you just sit in a project room together with 10 people talking about strategy, and within 15 minutes, you can show the first result of that strategy discussion, right? Play with it, try things out. If it doesn't work, start again. Instead of how we have done projects in the early days, is like locking ourselves into rooms, building probably big boxes full of all kinds of architectural diagrams and so on. I think that needs to change, needs to go away. We just need to start building. As soon as we encounter an issue during that build, fix the issue together as a tech provider, as a bank, and use the skills that everybody has around. That's one thing. I think the other thing is really accepting the other one's views on you as a bank. So in the earlier days, banks had difficulties with people being critical on a bank. I think they now basically start to accept it and start to learn from other industries instead of sitting on the big rock looking down on the other industries. So I think that is something where tech and people come together by just do it, I would like to say.
That's the easiest way to go, isn't it? Michelle's got a really fascinating question. Are traditional banks destined to become processing centres rather than consumer-facing brands? I'm going for Andreas on that one then.
I think I just that reminded me of a study I did actually 8 years ago together with colleagues when I was still a management consultant. And although many things that management consultants say may not become true, but I think this one really stuck. Back then we said there are three ways that banks may end up. As an ecosystem provider, basically organizing the front end, having all the customers, and then getting the best offers behind them. Basically be an integrator. Be a specialty, very good at either a strong local footprint like the German savings banks, or being a specialty provider for consumer finance and so on, or become really a balance sheet and a processing factory. And I think we see that emerging. So many banks still have sort of tapped into all of them, but the trajectory is rather clear that they are either losing customers or giving away their products. And so I think I offer everything to everybody will not be the case. Now, there won't be many, we don't need many ecosystem providers, and it's not a prerogative of the banks to be that. Look at the Amazons and Googles of this world. So I think, all banks will end up in either one of those three pockets. I think that's still as true as it was 8 years ago.
It's really interesting, actually. We did a panel last week, and we had HSBC on, who was saying, they're not losing business as such. It's just that younger generations, particularly Gen Z and millennials, will just have more than one bank account. And like you brought it up earlier, people do different things with their bank accounts now. And
nobody cancels an account, right? As long as it doesn't cost money, why would I bother?
Why would it? If you can build up credit and it helps towards your, your mortgage score and everything else, it is just a bit of a different world that we're moving in now. Yeah. But Chinthana asked another interesting question. Will the banks move towards crypto-enabled accounts with digitalization? Does anybody want to go on that one?
Short answer would be yes. But it depends a little bit, again, on banks, because banks is pretty wide. Right. So, but what I think that in specific regions in the world, the answer would be definitely yes. The question here is only where will that start? Because there will be, we see it now that there's more pressure coming on crypto as well. China, India examples all over. But on the other hand, we see financial products coming on the market, which are, for example, loans, where digital assets can be basically a security, right? So yes, I definitely think the question is, where will it start and which region will be first? I think Asia as well as Europe might be front runners here.
And I know we've talked about regulation earlier, but things like know your customer, anti-money laundering, those sorts of implications that banks would need to consider before they integrated anything.
Gina, that's what I was going to bring up almost exactly. I was involved in the project while I was at Citi, where Google was putting, I think they called it Googleplex, basically putting a front end on Google Pay to back ends of bank accounts. And it was a fascinating experience on, first of all, the regulation side. The point I wanted to bring up there was the banking license is a key issue between fintechs and the banks, as well as the data question, which was brought up earlier, that it sort of involves. And ultimately, it gets to who owns the customer. In the case of Google Pay being the front end to banks' back ends, and I think they worked with a number of banks before they ended up canceling the project. That was after I left, so I don't really know what happened, other than, of course, it was a big cultural challenge to merge these kinds of applications that Google was doing with GPay for the users, and Citi was working on in the traditional areas. But the whole question of data sharing, open banking was mentioned, which is a regulation designed for data sharing, which is intended to break this kind of logjam, if you will, between the fintechs and the banks about whose customer data, whose data is it, who owns the customer. I think these are things that also need to be worked out going forward.
It's going to be interesting. I know that here at the FCA has already had talks about it, but it's going to be very tricky to iron out, I'm sure. It'll be something we might even be talking about next December, 2022, going into 2023, I'm sure. We've got about another 5 minutes left of the webinar, so I'm just wondering if we do a bit of a quick fire round with some of the questions that we've got left. Let's go, Andreas. Why do banks struggle to build a digital initiative?
I think the three reasons I mentioned before: A, letting go of existing complexity and rethinking their offer; B, finding the right people to think in an innovation, agile, iterative approaches of continuous improvement instead of, I think Sheryl Sandberg said, done is better than perfect. So I think that's not the culture in a bank. And C, because of certain regulatory boundaries.
Excellent, thank you. Anton, what can be done to fight against growing digital competition in banking? Or do we want to fight against it, maybe?
Yeah, exactly. So it depends a little bit from what angle you ask this question. So if you're in a bank and you fear that the digital competition is eating your lunch, then I'm not sure what you can do then other than digitalize yourself. But so the question is a little bit broad, I would say. But I'm not sure if we need to fight competition. I always think that competition is good because it allows you as a consumer to choose, obviously, but it also makes sure that you get as a consumer the best offer, and it's pushing everybody who is offering services to create the best possible services. Maybe Andreas, you have a different view on this one. Just to
shake his head. No.
It's such a broad question.
I don't see there's no at least for us, and the competition is really the consumer and the stickiness of certain players changing the way they work. But the competition is not the competition per se. I think we are building a market that is so huge, so the opportunities outweigh the rivalry.
It's a large market, isn't it, at the end of the day? Excellent. And Eric, the last question from our audience. Security on software as a service, it's a major issue. I know we touched on it earlier as well. Any tips on how that can be overcome?
A lot of it, of course, depends on the software as a service providers and what they are giving as security. I could talk a bit about Salesforce, for example, which spent a lot of time on their main cloud offering, improving their security to the point where banks were happy and satisfied to use it. And they've been acquiring a lot of companies since then to provide more innovations and compete with and keep up with their competition. But the level of security hasn't always been keeping pace with the level of innovation. So I think the SaaS providers have a very big challenge to innovate on the one hand because of the competition, and ensure that their security controls remain as strong as ever. I think in terms of what's going on in the banks as well. I just want to pick up a bit on what Anton and Andreas were saying, because when you're accessing SaaS applications in the bank, you're doing so in the context of existing systems as well, and often there's a need to integrate the SaaS providers with the current systems that need to be modernized, which provides another level of challenge on the security and on just the whole setting up and enabling of the back end for provisioning and digitization. SaaS is part of it. Existing systems are part of it. Security has to be done from the beginning and taken into account in all of these activities. But I think it's not one challenge only for SaaS. It's challenge in the SaaS, but challenge also in the context of preparing internal systems to take part in those integrations and those foundations for digitization.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And I guess for myself, as it's the last webinar of the year, I think from my point of view, it would be interesting to ask you for your Christmas wish, what you want 2022 to bring in terms of sort of enabling digital banking of the future. So we'll go clockwise on my screen. So we've got Andreas first. What's your 2022 wish?
I hope I speak of everybody's mind, but end of Corona restrictions. So I think, over the last 2 years, I've onboarded so many new colleagues especially in our IT, that I haven't even met, let's say, in person. And I really would like to. We did a core banking migration. We did tremendous work in the last 1.5 years, and I'd really love to celebrate all the achievements and celebrate with people in one room. That is my biggest wish.
And a good wish. Thank you, Eric.
I absolutely agree on this one. Having recently had a company outing canceled due to the latest variant, I would say I'm very interested in the ecosystem effects of open banking, and I would like to see that sort of approach spread wider to other industries, other areas, maybe insurance, maybe government, so that, as you said earlier, Gina, when you're preparing your tax returns, it's just made easier by having these APIs out there. So it shouldn't be something that's restricted to the banking area. Even there, I think open APIs, open banking APIs have a way to go. And I'd like to see that progress, and I'd like to see that whole concept progress so that many more things are made easier by those kinds of APIs being put in place.
Excellent, thank you. And Anton?
Of course, the pandemic is set, so obviously I think nobody would disagree on this one. But looking at what my wish would be is that more financial institutions would really look into sustainability, offering more green products, so that we can benefit from it and that we can all really fight all global warming, etc., etc. I would really have a green mortgage myself instead of what I currently do. Plus, I would really have a better insight in where is my money going to. So indeed, where is, if I buy shares, what is happening, where does it come from? I would really love to see that the money I put in is being spent well as well.
Well, I'm no Santa Claus, but I do hope you all get your Christmas wish. More integration, the pandemic ended, and better green options. It sounds good to me. Excellent. Well, thank you all for joining me today. And if there's anybody watching that wants to continue the conversation, of course, you can do using the hashtag Fintech Times Digital Enablers, and we will make this session live for you to watch afterwards. Well, not live, but we will send you a recording afterwards as well. So Anton, Eric, and Andreas, a huge thank you for joining me.
Thank you
as well.
Thank you for listening to the Fintech Times podcast. We hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as we did. Don't forget to check us out at thefintechtimes.com and subscribe to our monthly publication to keep up to date with all the latest fintech news.